Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Love That Loves You Back, a podcast between myself, Valerie, and my dear friend Jonathan Fremantle. I'm an artistic miscreant, otherwise known as a self-described third-generation art professional, who's currently raising a fourth-generation art professional, born in the depths of the Pale of Settlement in the former Soviet Union, and partly raised in Australia, lived and worked in London and Paris, and 15 years ago, by a quirk of fate, relocated to Zimbabwe, where I'm the co-founder of First Floor Gallery Harare, trying to figure out life, education, art, and predominantly love of art as life goes on. And without further ado, over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, Jonathan Fremantle. I grew up in Cape Town and studied in London. I did a long apprenticeship in fine art in the old sense, and have been more making art in one way or another ever since then. I live in Edinburgh now, but I also lived for a while in Johannesburg, where I had Hazard Gallery, and that was the context that I met Valerie about 10, 12 years ago, and just loved the conversation we had immediately about painting and how painting is everything. And that conversation's been a constant source of joy and sustenance over the years. So it does make sense that we share the conversation and look forward to where this goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it usually goes anywhere and everywhere, but somehow we always come back to art, and
Yeah,
because it is the love that loves us back. Thank you very
right.
much for joining us, and we look forward to sharing the journey. Hi, everybody. This is probably not an evergreen episode because it's partly a response to what one of my collectors recently called the malarkey in the art market happening right now. But really, I thought this would be a good opportunity to discuss the complicity and the idiocy of contemporary art press, which is no longer, worth reading. Everyone's been jumping up and down with the kind of schadenfreude of watching the art market collapse and reporting on the demise and just malignancy and system, this dead end that. And I believe personally that there is a moment right now that I'm feeling among our colleagues and peers that we've also had enough of this pathetic reportage that has never really been constructive. And this could be a moment to speak to how unconstructive it is. Partly because art press has really capitulated to the market and has put the cart before the horse, right? And allowing the market to lead the narrative in every conceivable way. And I've spoken before about the problem of the demise of art criticism, and perhaps this is a really good opportunity to have a conversation about art criticism as a discipline, as an expertise, which has been entirely shafted in the chase of the dollar because we've dispensed with connoisseurship and judgment. We need to acknowledge that art criticism is not a capitalist creature, it's not a colonial creature, it's not a patriarchal creature. Art criticism and writing about art judgment of artworks and reception of artworks date back to, say, the 5th century in China. It dates back to Plato, at least in terms of recorded record. These are benchmarks and parameters and thoughts that have been thought about, have been expressed by writers, by poets about art. And it's time that we get back to actually thinking and talking about art rather than flipping and flopping about what this collector has said on Instagram and in the chase of becoming an influencer. And I think we know who we're talking about on this occasion. That's kind of my perspective. And I'll just say that for all his vanity and celebrity, and bless him, Jerry Saltz doesn't get listed in the Art Review Power 100 and has
Yeah.
not been listed. Neither has been Roberta Smith or anyone who calls themselves an art critic. And I think it's time we start giving credit to
Mm,
people who are able to take a position on art
mm,
and say this is shit, because right now we live in a world of descriptives where people believe that social efficacy of a text written about an artwork is sufficient, and it 100% is not and
mm,
never has been. And I will say this to my dying day. This is the hill I will die on, happy to
mm,
die on that,
mm,
and I will call something shit and I don't care,
mm.
because 90% at least of all artwork made right now is terrible. It's really, really awful. And that has been so for forever. And that's
Forever. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I think the ability to look clearly at the moment, and it doesn't mean that someone who's deriving entertainment, personal entertainment by making art should be stopped. There's no crusade in that sense. We're really talking about how to sharpen the ability to discern what something that's fine, something that's useful. Like a good critic isn't infallible. I mean, even Vasari, who was probably the first kind of recorded art critic with his lives of the artists. He made some stuff up. He fabricated things slightly or told stories. I mean, his best mate was Michelangelo. And if you read the lives of the artists, it's clear that he puts Michelangelo at the top. You could argue that they were mates. He was a fine artist in his own right, but not one of the best, but he was able to discern what was happening around him and to pick out, because there are hundreds of okay Renaissance artists that we've now forgotten. I'm sure those homes where those paintings hung were happy homes, But at the time, you need someone who's has a sharpened intellect and empathy and courage to speak about what they're seeing. People like Julian Barnes, who's really a writer, is an essay writer and a novelist. But when he writes about Vuillard or Howard Hodgkin, artists who he knows and loves, whose work he knows deeply, then that text that he supplies unlocks the work even further. That's another function that's lost when it's just commentary. It's like Daily Mail level commentary on the market, not the art.
Yeah, and I often feel that the moment that we're in, the political correctness creates a huge amount of self-censorship, because heaven forbid you say something critical when
Yeah.
criticism is the whole job description. I really kind of rail against the idea that criticism is not a professional discipline, and the idea that, criticism, the word sounds really negative, and yet criticism implies a reasoned opinion. At which point do we feel that expertise is not relevant? And expertise is relevant. I mean, you and I often compare notes about people, making pronouncements about hideous paintings that demonstrate absolute profound lack of technical ability
Mhm.
and understanding of how paint works. And then somebody saying, oh, there's some good paintings there. And I'm like, you don't know anything about painting. Why don't you learn?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people who engage with art have not really bothered to understand the process or the method of the making, and are just completely hoodwinked. I mean, there is a level of hoodwinking that happens because we've ceded so much to text. And also the fact that we don't have polemics as a viable journalistic activity, right? That we're presented overwhelmingly with sort of with a paradigmatic sort of didactic presentation of something that would not enable us in terms of art writing to form an opinion actually as to what the person thinks of the work, but rather supposedly an elaboration of the content of the artwork. And I just think all of it is bullshit.
Can you think of an example where good art criticism, in your own experience, you've read something that's made you spit your coffee out, that it's so good and accurate?
Clement
Yeah.
Greenberg, and I don't give a flying fuck again as to who disagrees. I remember being in a bookstore, right?
Yeah.
This is in Australia. I remember precisely was readings in Lygon Street, picking up a book of Clement Greenberg and just being floored, just like on a
Mm.
random page, because that's how I do, and almost bursting into tears because then I
Yeah.
looked, he had died just recently, and being devastated that I'd never get to meet
Mm.
him. That to me
Mm.
was just like unequivocally.
He's
And people
definitely,
say that he
definitely
wrote,
up there.
yeah, that he's one of the last ones who was
Mm.
willing to take a position, but also commit. It's about
Mhm.
committing to an artist and being
Yeah.
able to say, I will fight for this artist. And in a way, this is something that I want to, like, that I kind of see myself doing, or just taking positions on artists. I mean,
Yeah.
as a gallerist, we're all sort of taking positions on artists. And here's another thing that I think is really interesting is, like, I've been told as a gallerist that I can't write about my artists because of a vested interest. There's been a couple of occasions where our artists were in institutional shows, and I was told that I'm like too close, that I have a conflict
Mm.
of interest. And I'm
Of
like,
course.
no, I am the preeminent scholar of this
Yeah.
artist's work. Why? Because I've built this person's career.
Mm.
I was there day one. We've worked together. I am the
Yeah.
scholar.
You could say the same about Greenberg. He's picked his artists and championed them, and he may as well have been their gallerist and he
Mm.
understood them. Another writer that pops into my head in that same very kind of empty room of great art writers would be John Berger. He understood the incredible risk that it takes to make a great artwork, and he understood what it would require of the artist to get there. And so when he sees it, he's able to speak in a way that helps you understand what it is that has happened. It's so moving as an artist when you hear someone speaking in that way. It's so rare that you hear someone who's able to tune into that frequency. But also, he didn't like everything. He liked the good things.
You like the good things. I mean, the other thing is about art writing, and you often see, especially in the art criticism wars of the 19th century in Paris, a lot of art critics were also writers, right? Or poets like Baudelaire, right? And André Breton. That was the normal thing, is also to be able to write in a way that is artistic rather than didactic.
Yeah.
All right. To be impassioned and to think, to communicate the ethos and to open doors rather than prescribe. And I
Hmm.
also don't see that happening anymore. Is like in my own writing, I kind of put myself in a way at right angles to the work. I don't want to learn too much about the artwork. I want to position what I know about the artist and their practice, and then position my response in a
Hmm.
way that would open pathways to interpretation to the
Yeah.
reader rather than tell them what to think, and create an experience that sits somewhere in between that can be an entry portal. That is kind of a deliberate strategy in some ways, because in speaking to artists, often artists don't fully analyze or process their work until after the making, and then it continues to evolve in meaning through engagement with the audiences
Yeah.
and interpretation. And I think a lot of artists, and I'm thinking in particular of somebody like Gresham Tapio Nyaude, he's very relaxed about the work being open and also not knowing everything about his own
Mm.
work. And that kind of generosity of spirit is present with a lot of the best ones,
Mm.
I will
Yeah.
say. It's only the minor artists who are deeply attached to
Hmm.
the minutiae of their prescription.
Yeah.
And I say to them, you will die.
Yeah. When you're not there to provide the
Yeah.
PDF. If you see the artwork as a kind of flame, that if it's going to be a masterpiece that lives through the ages, we need to be able to tend it. The tending to that flame is our looking and our falling in love with it. And the kind of generosity and openness of the artist is one factor. But I think also when you don't know what it is that's happened, it's often because it's bigger than you. You've just become a kind of vessel for something that needed to be said. And at that point, a really wise or intuitive and committed, as in they've got blood on their hands, critic can come and help us at that moment. It's so vital. I think I mentioned this before. What Richard DeMarco said, my friend and hero, definitely someone who has performed that kind of Greenberg function to many artists. His take is that you have nothing to say about an artwork unless you love it.
Mm.
And by love, he means you get it. And
Yeah.
you don't get the concept or the text, you get the soul of the thing. And from that point, it's also your artwork. So these great writings, they're writing as if they made it too. And I think that's part of it.
I mean, I certainly feel that, but I also want to come back to this moment in the art world where we have reached a lot of genuine dead ends because of the pursuing a policy of dispensing with art criticism, dispensing with expertise, allowing. I mean, collectors cannot lead. They enter fresh and new into the market. They're there to learn. And if you put them in a position of power, they exercise it in the way a 5-year-old would. It's like
Yeah.
me likey, and then spit the dummy, right? When things don't go their way. And that's completely understandable. And yet, this is who we ceded the power to. And that's just
There is a general
appalling.
a trend of collectors with a voice, whether it's podcasts or huge Instagram followings, and now offering subscriptions to listen to them telling you which artworks are good and
Yeah.
bad. And I think that's obviously problematic because their interest is in building a collection and the value of the work they have in the collection. The arch enemy of that is someone saying, you've bought a pile of crap.
Yeah, as much as, we want to support collectors and they're important and activist collectors are really who, take risks are important. At the same time, the recognition is important that you will make mistakes, and that's also
Yeah.
okay. In general, the whole notion of art as an investment class, art as an asset class, that has been championed for a good 40, 50 years now. It's in the same way as economics is a hard science. It's not anything that involves human beings and temperament of human beings and, volatility and various penchants and God knows what you ate for
Mm.
supper the previous evening kind
Mm.
of decision making. The fact that we don't know so much about who we are as machines, as, spirits in a meat suit means that it's not a hard science, that art will never be that kind of an asset class with that kind of
Mm.
a robust analysis that
Mm.
people have tried to force on it. And hence, a lot of the people who assume that they're buying investments are in trouble unless
Yeah.
they manipulate the market on their own. Again, none of this has to do with the art itself. And I
No.
think that's kind of something that I want to get back to is actually talking about the art, not what you liked. I want to talk about art that you don't necessarily like,
Yeah.
but then you know it's good, and then
Yeah.
you give yourself time to build a relationship with it or not, and then being able to say, this is not my taste, but I know it is good. And that is something that we don't see a lot of people doing either. Just
Mhm.
saying, this is not necessarily my aesthetic preference, but I recognize this as having merit.
It's way more valuable than just endless commentary on the industry and the business. It's so easy to comment on the industry, but to speak from direct experience about an artwork that has an effect on you, that's lacking.
Having just come back from an art fair on the importance of drawing distinction of the various experiences of art and
Yeah.
why context matters. Just speaking to somebody who calls themselves a collector at the fair, he said that he just doesn't have time to go to exhibitions, that he'd rather just see things at art fairs. And there is that confusion that happens that experience of art in different contexts is different. Expertise requires your ability to traverse the whole sort of spectrum of art experiences from the studio to the museum
Yeah.
and a supermarket. Personally speaking, I don't understand how anyone can look at art at an art fair. It's the same as trying to listen to one instrument play in the middle of a cacophony, right, of
Yeah.
everyone playing the same time. So again, forming judgment or developing any expertise if your experience of food as a supermarket, as is art in an art fair, is a completely faulty premise. And yet that's what the art press is full of. I mean,
It's one of the only areas where we think it's acceptable to go essentially like a trade fair for our experience. If you were into books, you'd find your favorite bookstore and you'd go there and you'd develop a relationship with the owner and they'd tell you what's good. And you might enjoy cheese and there might be a cheesemonger near you and you might only go to that cheesemonger because it's the cheese you want, not the cheesemonger. You want access to good cheese. I think it's the trust you put in someone like you, with your gallery and the way that you've invested in these artists and developed them and grown new artists. I mean, I'm going to make an analogy here, which you'll find uncomfortable, but if you support a football club, that football club will have
watch
some
me bristle, watch me bristle.
we'll have some superstars and they'll develop some young talent and you're there for them. You support them. And through that, your enjoyment of football comes through this identity you have with this club. And I think, what we lose in this idea that in order to buy the right art, we need to have access to everything and make that decision ourselves, whether it's just walking around multiple art fairs with millions of different visceral impressions being thrown at you and thinking that any human can make a good decision based on those conditions. Rather, put your trust in a gallery that you like and a critic or a writer that you trust. Listen to them, be guided by them, learn from them, develop your own taste. Push back, say, why is that player not playing? I like him. He scores more goals, whatever. There's a relationship you develop with that corner shop, the guy that makes your shoes and he's made your father's shoes or whatever. I'm extending the analogy a bit far here, but the point is, I think we've lost that kind of ability to trust someone who knows and find that person, identify them, support them. And those collectors and buyers that support galleries in that way should get a special medal because they're part of the solution.
I agree. I think part of the issue is the people felt that more information leads to better decision making.
That's it.
And this is not borne out by practice or statistics. There's a famous example of when hiring anyone, you just pick up the first 30 CVs and throw the rest out. Your ability to choose better is not conditioned on having more. It's partly because of our limitations as humans, as physical bodies.
Mhm.
And again, this is something that is frequently completely ignored in contemporary discourse, which prioritizes supposedly humans and social factors and yet completely ignores uh, the actual human in front of them or the one who is talking. Their physical limitations are interesting and relevant in that regard. And art is a very embodied experience. And
Mhm.
again, this is something that we can talk about ad nauseum, right? And we
Yes.
do once in a while. But when it comes to art criticism in particular, I think the solution is for art press to actually get back to talking about art.
Mhm.
And because there's so few factors that we can control when it comes to the fluctuations of the art market.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, the movements of the art market is wherever the attention of the rich person is, because that's how the art market is positioned right now. Whoever is spending the money, whatever their attention is geared towards, is what's going to get priority. And if it's not going to be art at that moment, then the art market is going to be down. If it's China at that moment, they'll be spending on Asian art. That's how it is. And we in the art world are essentially not in charge of that attention and never going to be. Right.
Mhm.
And that's okay because our job is to be focused on art. And that's what we should be doing so that when people turn their attention to art, they have an ability to choose things that are interesting, important, and valuable, right? And that is the right priority of things. This is what I'm personally committed to with my work and the artists that I choose to work with and support. And if the market joins, good for them. They should be so lucky. They should be so lucky as to be able to support us and not the other way around. I've trained everyone I've worked with. We're doing you a favor when you come and talk to us. You are experiencing a privileged experience, something very, very important. And that's where it is. Boys and girls, write about art, focus on art, become experts.
Mm.
Don't be afraid to piss someone off because
Mm.
we're not in the world where you're going to be liked by everyone. And
No.
that's also
And
okay.
by speaking about what you like and being honest, by vocalizing it, you have a deeper experience because you have to work out what it is that you like or dislike or why does your body feel so ecstatic or uneasy or whatever it is. And the ultimate aim of a kind of human life isn't lots of experience, it's a deepening of experience, right?
Mm.
We're not supermarket shopping for more. We want something that feeds us on a deeper level. And that's where art is pretty good.
I'm going to take the food analogy also a bit far, simply because I just came back from Australia and I felt entirely malnourished by all of the food that I ate there because the food supply has been so distressed through processing, through storage, through all of these sanitization. All the food looks perfect. You eat it and it vaguely tastes like food and you feel entirely malnourished by it. And so to come back, and you're in a developed world where everything's accessible, everything's, structured to make your experiences easy. Everything's facilitated and expensive, and yet entirely removed from the source and not nourishing. And, to come back to Zimbabwe, where we don't have a huge number of those processed goods, but you feel immediately your body responding to the reality of the food that you're eating and actually feeling it. And I think that's also the difference between processed art and the way art has been processed for us for consumption and having immediate important experiences and committing to those experiences and validating those experiences through your own visceral engagement with them. And that's what we're talking about. And I think, yeah, food analogy is better than the football analogy,
I
Jonathan.
mean, I disagree, but
In the same way that you will go climbing mountains and I will not.
yes, I'll one day take you to a football match. Let's see.
Well, I were probably more likely to go to a football match than to climb a mountain.
Yeah.